Good afternoon. Talk back to me now, all right? My name is Malcolm Holmes. I'm Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives and DEI for the Cronkite School. We are elated that you have chosen to join us for this event this afternoon. My task is an easy one. We just want to welcome you on behalf of Dean Batento Batts and the entire Cronkite Nation. And I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Sandy, the Executive Director of NBCU, right? Thank you.
How's everyone this evening? Good. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to kick off Super Bowl week here at the Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Thank you to Dean Batts and your first class staff, Malcolm and Leah. You all have been remarkable throughout this process. We're so grateful. NBCU Academy is always excited to engage with our partner schools. The Cronkite School is one of 45 partner schools that we have. Also, just announced a few weeks ago, we added 15 other schools, including the University of Arizona. So I'm excited that some of our students have taken the trek from Tucson to Phoenix to be here tonight. So let's give them a big hand for pouring into their journey. NBCU Academy was born out of our 50-50 challenge to diversify newsrooms and to make sure that the media and technology industry represented the very people that we serve. Whether you're a content creator or a rising journalist, we want to make sure that you have access and opportunity. It shouldn't matter where you come from. It shouldn't matter the constraints in which the schools that you matriculate at. We believe that you deserve to have a seat at the table. And in fact, I hope that we empower you enough that you believe that you are actually the table, right? So we're so excited to have this all-star lineup, which we'll get to in just a moment. And I also wanted to make sure that I thank my boss, our Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the NBC News Group, Yvette Miley, for making this all possible. She sees the vision and the value of what we do, and allowing us to showcase our brand here at the Super Bowl is wonderful. So without further ado, let's get our program started. I'm so thrilled that this is largely produced by your colleagues and students here from Cronkite. So I'm going to bring up your MC for the day, and who will read the bios of our participants, Ms. Janae Bradford. She's a graduate student here, graduating in December, so I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ms. Sharp, for everything, this opportunity. As she mentioned, my name is Janae Bradford, and I am a master's student in the sports journalism program here at the Walter Cronkite School for Journalism and Mass Communications. It's really an honor to be here. I'm so glad you guys made it, and U of A, thank you so much for being here. And I will be your MC, just providing information about our panelists. But before we get to our first guest, let's learn a little bit more about the NBCU Academy's educational resources for the newly founded Fundamentals of Journalism course. Let's take a listen.
This is NBC, the national broadcasting company.
Welcome once again to Meet the Press.
Here it is, a new program called Today. We'll be with you every day for 2 hours in the morning. NBC News presents the March on Washington.
The most massive demonstration ever seen in the capital or in the nation.
Chad, here is a flash from the Associated Press, Dateline Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead.
I want to assure you that NBC is fully staffed with other reporters who are not in custody by the Daly City Police.
The city of Saigon was renamed today.
Live from the Berlin Wall.
Hi, everybody, and good evening. It's good to have you with us. These are the pressing issues.
Greetings and welcome to NBCU Academy. For over 80 years, NBC News has been on the forefront of journalism.
From this room, NBC sent you its report, hour by hour, and sometimes even minute by minute.
Delivering current events to your living room and to the palm of your hand. NBC News journalists travel to all corners of the globe, reporting on the world's most important stories by uncovering the facts and documenting history.
Good morning and welcome to Moscow.
And it's a job that can come with some risk.
They're throwing stones at us here. The sentries are firing their rifles over the heads of these people to keep them suppressed.
You're watching NBC's Arthur Kent describing the outgoing Patriot missile launched from that big Air Force complex there.
Journalism is the endeavor of finding and reporting the facts. This is not just our job, it is our right. A right guaranteed to all Americans in the U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights in the First Amendment as freedom of the press. But this freedom comes with responsibility to which we as journalists are held to the highest standard. We are accountable to ourselves and to the public, and to be fair, accurate, inclusive, transparent, and honest in all our reporting. In this course on the fundamentals of journalism, you'll hear firsthand from the best reporters and news writers in the business.
Something that catches my attention is going to catch the viewer's attention.
They will share with you their best practices and personal advice.
If you're a good storyteller, your story is going to be the one people remember.
On how to conduct the best interview, right for broadcast, and stay dedicated to the core principles of reporting the facts.
Most importantly, get it right.
You will be introduced to everyday challenges that journalists face, like trusting your sources, verifying information, and mitigating bias. And you'll get a sneak peek into the roles and functions of a breaking newsroom, where all the facets of news writing and reporting come together in real time. From all of us at NBC News, we hope you'll enjoy this course on the fundamentals of journalism and walk away with what you need to start your careers in the right direction. For NBCU Academy, I'm Lester Holt.
All right, without further ado, we'll introduce the first panelist. All right, our moderator for today is a great friend of mine. We have Alexis Davis. Please stand. Alexis is also a master's student in the sports journalism program, entering her second semester. She graduated from North Carolina A&T State University with her Bachelor's of Arts in Multimedia Journalism. She has published work for the MEAC, AZ Preps 365, and she's also play-by-play, commentator, analyst, and sideline reporter for Pac-12 live stream for women's basketball for ASU. And then without further ado, we have our very, very special guest. We have Kenneth Shropshire. Thank you. Mr. Shropshire is the senior advisor to the Dean of Coalition for Equity and Opportunity, and he's also the David W. Hawk Professor Emeritus at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he founded and directed the Wharton Sports Business Initiative. He's also the former CEO of the Global Sports Institute and the Adidas Distinguished Professor for Global Sport at Arizona State University. Please welcome Kenneth Shropshire.
Thank you so much, Janae, for those great, great introductions. So happy to be here with you, Mr. Shropshire.
Good to be here. Good to be
here. Go ahead.
Good to be back here.
Yes, back at Cronkite, great things happening all over the place, every place you turn. So my first question this evening for you, so about 7 years ago, you founded the Global Sports Institute, and lately they have partnered with the Washington Post to provide data for the Blackout Series. And for those of you that don't know what the Blackout Series is, it is the study that they did to look into the lack of hiring of black coaches for the NFL. So, being able to provide that data, how did that really help you kind of see your vision pushed forward a bit?
Well, it helped a lot. I mean, it was really, in some ways, when I took a job at Wharton 40 years ago, I was, frankly, I was trying to figure out, how do I start making money as soon as possible as a consultant? I was trying to really move too fast and get too many returns when I hadn't really done anything. And when we started doing that work here, which was now about 6 years ago, we said, well, let's plant the seeds and do some work that hasn't been done before. And what that work is, and it's really worth taking a look at, is not just a snapshot of what's the story of diversity and hiring in the NFL. It looked at a full 20 years and looked at all the trends and looked at all the background of all the coaches and provided the Washington Post with insights that they couldn't just do in a quick turnaround kind of fashion. So when they called and said, we hear you have this data, we'd like to talk to you, it was really rewarding. And it was really from the work that we did kind of in the background. And we actually published a little annual report and said, here's our work. But the Washington Post and then some other things that followed really helped to see the light of day.
Kind of to expand upon that, you've authored over 12 books, have your JD from Columbia University. When you were younger, what inspired you to go after these big, grand tasks of just, achievement?
When I was younger, what do you... so at the NFL level, the first lawsuit against a team claiming discrimination by the team against him because he's an African American. No real insights except that it's really one of my other favorite quotes is one from JFK. It's sooner or later we all have the opportunity to be courageous. How do you become this great leader in this space? So here's Brian Flores, who has a lot of career ahead of him and didn't know he'd get a job with Pittsburgh if he did this, files this action because he thinks it's the right thing to do to try to move the needle forward on this issue. And it's something that's been talked about by a lot of people. So don't have any specific insights on how successful or not it will be, but the idea that he filed it is really monumental in itself.
Have any more questions from the students?
Yeah, so my name's Kenji Ito. Oh my God, I have to put this away from my face. So, we've obviously seen a diversity issue in the NFL, especially, like you mentioned, Brian Flores and a couple others. But we've also seen a diversity issue in the NBA, the MLB, but it's not brought up as much. So is there like a certain reason why, or do you think that journalists can take a certain angle to kind of relate all the 4 major sports leagues all into one?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I spent some time up in Canada, so you left the NHL out of that too, which is, and I've always kind of stayed away from thinking about the NHL. So, it's a bunch of white guys playing, so what could that possibly look like? And there's an organization up there called the Carnegie Initiative, which looks at this whole issue, not so much at the level of coaching and management, but actually playing the game. So part of what that brought me to the realization of, I should have thought about this before. All these sports are at different levels in terms of where they are. Baseball too is one of those sports that went from nearly 19% African American, now it's down to about 6 or 7%. The Latino number has increased, that is foreign born, and it's kind of sidebar, the almost complete absence of Mexican Americans playing baseball is relatively striking as well. So playing the game is problematic there, as well as leadership. The NBA is more of a success story, but you still get to the point of, and you got Michael Jordan as an owner there, but you still get to the point of, could there be greater success? And the one thing to think in mind as you do work in this space is nobody can tell you what the perfect number is. Often whenever I have a kind of a full speed conversation on this, I start off the conversation saying, what does success look like? Where is it that we're striving to get to anyway? And I'll tell you what the denominator is not. It's not the racial makeup of the players on the field of play, and it's not the population of the United States. So nobody really knows what the right kind of number is as to what the number of head coaches, what the number of owners should be and the like. So that's something that a lot of work could be done on as well.
Thank you so much, students, for asking questions and interacting with Mr. Sharpshire. Next, we're going to have Janae come back up and kind of get us excited for the next conversations to come.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you again, Mr. Shropshire, for those great words. I hope you enjoyed everything he said and took something from that. All right, up next, we'll have our NBCU Sports panel, which consists of 4 different people in the NBC and NFL realm. But before we do that, let's learn about NBCU's Academy's signature postgraduate program for young journalists getting their hands-on experience at the network level. Let's take a look.
Exciting, monumental, bold, very ambitious,
fast-paced,
innovative, and encouraging,
dynamic,
life-changing, purposeful, but overall incredible. The Embed experience has given me the opportunity to produce stories for La Comunidad Latina, the Hispanic community. But above all that, it has given me the opportunity to network with professionals within NBC Universal.
The Embed program has sped up my career at a pace that I never thought possible.
I'm the most proud of the story that I wrote about Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson becoming the first Black woman Supreme Court Justice.
There's just so much hands-on experience with reporting and writing. I had done a story about the 40-year anniversary of the Chinese garment worker strike in Chinatown.
This is a unique opportunity to have your byline and to build a body of work is something that is super rare.
NBCU Academy, it's definitely hands-on. You get the experience of reporting, writing, and the feeling of being in a newsroom. One of the stories that I'm most proud of centered around a majority Black town of Mason, Tennessee, because it was my first investigative piece.
The story got published on NBCNews.com for NBC Latino.
Now, our American dream is in question.
So I was able to document, record, edit, and take images of these farm workers.
As you saw there, the candlelight I really used national platform here at NBC Universal to amplify the story to a different level.
So it's definitely wonderful to see the amount of talent that is within NBC Universal, but also how willing they are to share their knowledge and help us excel as journalists.
It's so much more hands-on than just an internship, doing these really cool events and going to conferences.
It's so important and driving the next generation of journalists to actually see that they can do it. So the Embed program is definitely showcasing that.
I want to continue growing within NBC Universal and perhaps in the future giving the opportunity for many others, especially minorities like myself.
Thank you for that. And now I will be announcing the panelists for the NBC Sports conversation about careers, beats, and storytelling. So first we have Miles Simmons, an NFL content creator for Pro Football Talk. Will you please? Come on. Have a seat in our wonderful Cronkite green chairs. So Mr. Simmons he was a Raiders beat reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal in the 2019 season, has also spent time in 2020 as a senior writer and editor for the Carolina Panthers. All right, next person we have is Ron Vaccaro. Ron is the Vice President of Editorial Content for NBC Sports Group. He's a Sports Emmy Award winner, Olympics researcher for the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics and the London Summer Olympics in 2012. He was also an Olympic commentator for various track and field events. And next we have Shireen Williams. She is a writer for Pro Football Talk as well. She was inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2018 as the first woman to win the Dick McCain Award. In 2007, Williams also became the first woman member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame Selection Committee. Nice. Do it for the women. And last but certainly not least, we have Keon Branch. He is a manager influencer for talent and culture marketing at the NFL. His background just consists of marketing, digital media, marketing specifically, creative storytelling, all the fun business and arts collabs. That's what he does. He got his Bachelor's of Administration from Morehouse College, and in 2019, he received the Ad Color Future Award, which is a distinct honor that identifies the next generation of leaders in advertising, marketing, media, and public relations. Welcome, everybody. All right, take it away, Alexis.
Again, just like Janae said, we are so happy to have you here in Cronkite with us. We know it's so many amazing things going on this week in Phoenix with the Super Bowl. You could be so many other places, but the fact that you are taking time to be here with myself and other young journalists, we definitely do not take that for granted. So my first question is going to be for Mr. Recaro. So in a world where there's, we have to determine real and fake news, what are some things that you would tell journalists, young journalists, to do to kind of take that extra step to kind of decipher the two?
Well, thank you. That's a really important question, and I was watching some of the stuff earlier, either the Lester video or even the conversation we just heard, and I think facts are a baseline and a starting point, but so often, and Shireen and Miles and a lot of their colleagues do this really well, it's okay, what does this mean? Because especially when you cover leagues, which is what we do, or if you cover governments or other things, like sometimes you could bury the truth in a lot of facts and a lot of jargon, and it's like, okay, well, what does this actually mean? So I think my answer to the question is be skeptical, be curious. No matter what position I've ever been hiring for, whether it's been a researcher, whether it's been a writer, whether it's been an on-air position, whether it's been a producer or a PA, I always use the term intellectual curiosity as a must for something. And basically don't take anything at face value. And sometimes you're going to find out that the face value is true, and be disciplined enough to admit that sometimes too. But be skeptical. And kind of my first boss at NBC kind of used to say, always be willing to ask what's wrong with this picture, and put in the work to answer that question. So a lot of times the narrative, and I always tell my teams too, when a certain set of conditions seems to fit a narrative too well, that's when your antenna really has to go up, because it never works quite that way. Well, sometimes it does, but very rarely. So that's what I would say, skeptical curiosity.
So as a follow-up for you, in events like the Super Bowl, there's hundreds and hundreds of reporters there. What advice do you give to your team to get that content, but to find their own unique angle, something that they won't find on another website?
Really, I haven't had to give that advice in a while, but if I did, it would be, and I'll say it wasn't the Super Bowl, but I was having breakfast yesterday in Los Angeles with our NASCAR reporter. Okay. There was an event yesterday, and we actually had a conversation about looking for angles to do, and it's what is kind of something that will bring the story to life. There is so much, I'll call it blocking and tackling, that goes on of, okay, this happened, and we don't want to necessarily just document things, but it's really how do you bring someone in and tell them a story and make them understand, okay, why did something happen, or why does it matter, or why should I care, or what's neat about this. So I think it's details matter, and not just, we were talking yesterday at the NASCAR event, and it's like, who wins the race? Yeah, that's important, but everyone's going to have that. That was an event. It was at the LA Coliseum. That in and of itself, how does that track come to be there? That curiosity chip, I would say.
So to kind of pose this question to the rest of the panel, since majority of your job includes being on the ground, being the one that actually goes after these stories, what are some strategies that you all use to go after these unique angles to make sure that your content isn't really reflecting others?
Yeah, that's a tough question. The Super Bowl is a different event than any other, obviously. And there's 6,000 reporters here. So to try to get something that's unique is really, really hard this week. So, I think it's the other weeks that when you really look for the stuff that maybe other people don't have. But this week's really tough to try to get something that no one else is going to have, because there are not many one-on-ones. I started to say there's not any, but there are a handful, obviously, for whatever company is broadcasting the Super Bowl. Fox, I think, right, Ron? So Fox will get some one-on-ones with people, and there may be something to come out of that. I remember last year we had Rodney Harrison get it was Aaron Donald, right, was thinking about retiring a year ago, and Rodney ended up getting that from Aaron, and so that's something that we had that no one else had. But that was one of the rare things that come out of last year's Super Bowl that no one else had. But it's really hard this week to try to do that this week.
I would say, kind of just to add to that from the NFL social side, what we look for is like, how can we uncover, that subsection of stories that aren't told, tapping into culturally unlocking those moments. A big piece of that this year has really been telling our players stories and looking for that relatability and connectivity. As we know with football, there are 53 people on the team wearing helmets. You maybe know 2 players per team, as opposed to an NBA team. So how can we create and generate content around these players that allow them to tell their stories around what they're passionate about, but also celebrate them in that moment on our social?
Yeah, I think having covered a couple of these things now, the biggest thing that to me stands out is, can you find something that maybe you can put your own spin on, that you have some sort of knowledge about that other people won't? Whether that is, an athlete from having covered them before, or that they are from a certain place and you're from that place, and that kind of helps you establish that connection. But like Shireen said, I mean, it's just, there's so much media here. There's so many people here. There are so many folks that are going to ask questions that, I mean, Shireen and I are about to go over to whatever y'all call the arena here, I don't remember what it is, but for media night, your opening night, whatever they call it now, and it's going to be people yelling questions at these athletes for an hour. And in my opinion, it is the absolute worst event on the NFL calendar. I can't stand it because you can't really gain any insight from that, and they're going to be Jimmy Kimmel's person running around like telling them to eat crickets and stuff like that. Like that is what it is. But over the course of the week, I mean, maybe you happen to hear one answer that's like, oh, I know something I can write off of that. And it's not just that you're doing something from that particular moment, but you're bringing in another moment that you've had either this season, last season, whatever it happens to be, and that can help you in that situation.
In the early 2000s, I was sent to New England. The Cowboys were playing New England. I was a beat writer for the Cowboys. And I was told to get a story on Tom Brady. And I was nervous about going in there because to write a Tom Brady story, you really need Tom Brady's voice, right? And he had just started dating Giselle. So the specific story they wanted was his relationship, how it had changed. Here are these 2 famous people. Are they locked inside their house, never go out? Like, what is it like to be in that relationship? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so difficult. And so I flew up to Foxborough, and the first thing Stacey James, the PR director, says is, hey, Tom's not doing any interviews at the podium. He's going to do it at his locker. And I'm thinking this is the worst case scenario because everyone's going to be crowded around Tom Brady's locker. So kind of media protocol, unspoken, unwritten, is for visiting media to kind of wait for local media to ask their first few questions, and then we start asking those sorts of questions. So 1 question was asked, 2, 3, 4. Finally, I'm like, okay, I better start asking this question because I don't know how long he's going to go here. So I try to ask a question. I'm talked over, and we get to the 7th question that's asked, and Tom says, all right, that's it, I'm done, and turns his back, and everybody just kind of disperses. And so I'm sweating bullets here thinking, I got nothing. Like, this story is going to include Bill Belichick and some teammates, but I don't have a single quote from Tom Brady. And so we still stand at his locker, and the PR guy's there, and I said, look, I flew all the way here. Like, I'm going to go ask Tom Brady my questions. And he goes, well, good luck with that. And I have a great relationship with Stacey, by the way. And he says, well, good luck with that. And I said, okay. And so I start going to Tom Brady, and he's like, whoa, wait. And so he goes up, and I'm as far away from Tom Brady as Ron and I are right now. And so Stacey says, hey, she flew all the way here from Dallas, and he's looking at his watch and says, I really need to make a phone call. I said, I tell you what, 2 questions. And he looks at his watch again. He goes, all right, 2 questions. And so I got my 2 questions. The quotes weren't fantastic, but they were good enough to use in a story. And then I had Tom Brady's voice in the story. And by the way, it's a one-on-one, so nobody else had those quotes. So I think part of my advice, to build on what Ron said, is be pushy. Just don't necessarily take no for an answer, and sometimes no does mean no, but there are some times that you could talk yourself into a story and get something that nobody else had.
So for you, Mr. Simmons, you've kind of experienced both worlds, being a team reporter internally and then being a beat reporter, I guess you could say externally. So what would you say are the two differences reporting in those different spaces?
Sure. The biggest thing is when you're not reporting for a team, you can say more of what you actually think, right? And it's funny, but it's true. I mean, and I was fortunate enough to work in a Rams organization that gave me a lot of leeway in terms of what I could say and what I couldn't. And there was never usually, I could maybe think of through 2 or 3 times where they actually got mad at me for something that I said or that I wrote. And one of them was there were people who, in 2015 at what was then called the Edward Jones Dome in St. Louis, Reggie Bush and then I think Josh McCown in consecutive weeks had slipped on concrete off of the sideline and they fell. And one of them got seriously hurt. And I tweeted, they really got to do something about that. And then they're like, you really need to not do that. And I'm like, okay, but everybody can see that this is true. So I think the biggest thing is that when you're not working for a team, I can say that and that's not going to be a problem, right? It was more of an issue probably when I worked for the Carolina Panthers because I asked a question in a press conference one day and it was about the fact that they wanted Curtis Samuel probably to play running back, right? And Christian McCaffrey had just gotten hurt. It's early in the 2020 season. And so they put Curtis Samuel in at running back against Tampa Bay and a snap or two. And so I said in the press conference a couple days later, hey, Christian McCaffrey's hurt. Curtis Samuel, is that something you like to do? La, la, la. And then I got off the press conference. This was in 2020, so it was on Zoom. And then I got an immediate call from my boss. Why would you ask that question? Because he did it in the game. That was the main story of practice, but he did it in the game. And so basically, if I had just been somebody from external media, if I had the position I had now, they can't get mad at me for that. But if you're in-house, those are the things that they can get mad at you about. You have a question? I don't know. I don't think we're in position right now to, just turn down a job, right? Just because you work for a team. I think a lot of things is about the attitude that you try to bring to it. Like when I was with the Rams, I always tried to approach it as if I were a real beat writer. If I were working for the LA Times, how would I ask this question? Or, and this is like a little trick that I used to pull, if I had a question that I thought would be on the borderline, I would tell my friend who works for the LA Times, hey, can you ask this for me? And he'd say, yeah, I'll do that, because it's a good question. And so that's sort of the ways that you have to kind of navigate beats sometimes. You got to know where the line is. And I don't think that just because you write for a team makes you worse than anybody else, right? It's all about the attitude that you take to it.
So kind of a follow-up, you mentioned social media, and everyone loves to talk about social media. So with myself and other young journalists in the audience, kind of building our social media presence, but it's not on a personal front, it's more so trying to get our names out there professionally. What are maybe 2 or 3 do's or don'ts that you would say, and Keon, you could probably answer this too, some do's or don'ts when you're building that professional platform on social media?
Gosh. Don't be a jerk to people, Think about if you were going to send a tweet or put up something on Instagram or make a TikTok and your grandmother was going to see it. Would you be okay with that? That's kind of a weird way of saying that maybe, but you want to make sure that if you're putting something up on the internet where it's probably going to last forever, you're not going to regret it later. So even now, when I decide, well, is this a good idea if I tweet this? If Ron sees this, is Ron going to get mad at me for this potentially? I think it's something that you always have to think about. But I would say put yourself out there in a positive way, Be yourself. And that's the thing that I think sometimes people forget is that, oh man, I gotta be this or I gotta be that. Like, not really. I mean, I talk about mustard on hot dogs, and like, have people on Twitter and who are Rams fans like really know me for that, because when I was in a press box and there would be a hot dog at halftime, I would put mustard on it and I would just tweet out #TeamMustard. That's really stupid, but it's also something that is me. And so, I don't know. I don't know how well that has built my brand or whatnot, but I think that at least if you're authentic to yourself and you're genuine, that's the best way of going about it.
Yeah, no, I think you hit that on the head. You have to be authentic in your brand and who you are, and not craft a narrative. I feel like what we see a lot today, especially on social, is people have crafted a narrative of what I want you to see or who I want you to be on these platforms. And specifically working with, influencers and celebrities, you can kind of see through that. You see what's real, you see what's genuine and per se. I think when you build those authentic relationships, people can see that. So I would say be who you are, but also have some piece of, like Miles said, a censor to yourself. Like, you're not gonna get up there and and say all this and say all that. You have to be very cognizant that this is social, and the age we live in, people are going to look at your socials before they look at anything else. Like, they'll look at your Instagram before they look at your LinkedIn. So it's just things you have to be cognizant. So make sure you're just building your brand for yourself, so people know, like, I'm going to get Keon, this is what Keon is for, this is what he stands for, but it's also more of a professional standpoint.
I'll just add really quickly, too, I think some good advice on the don'ts is, or at least think before posting if you're emotionally charged when you're typing. And it might be something that you're gonna, I don't care that Delta Airlines screwed up today, and you're like, and it might feel really good to send it in the moment, because it's like if you're using it to be empowering when you think you're in like one of those situations where it's making you feel good emotionally, that's like a trigger to me to just, okay, pause. And one quick story, because it's social media, I think, is really, in some respects, just the latest platform. But probably about a decade ago, we had an announcer in one sport. It wasn't football, and I was working on the show. And he said to me, and he had gotten in some hot water over a swear word that he had used, and he said, "Ron, will you make me a list of words I can't use?" and my response was, I said, if you are going to smile at the thought of saying the word, just don't say it. And I figured that would cover it more than any list would cover it. But it really gets to, there's going to be a record of anything for a long time. And is that something that in 10 minutes or 10 years you want out there? And to pass that test, I certainly echo the authenticity, and it's really all about a relationship, and it's know your audience, but your audience on those social platforms, I think sometimes people can get lulled into a false sense of security that their audience is only their followers. No, your audience is the world.
So at Cronkite, we're really taught the importance of the credential when you get these credentials for your event and the access that you have. I'll pose this to anyone. Can you all kind of talk about some strategies that you use to make your readers feel like they're at the event with you, and really going the extra mile and using that credential and your access to make them feel like they're there with you?
Shireen, you've covered the most events out of all of us, so I mean.
Yeah, I think it's really what we've talked about all along. It's just looking for a different angle. So, I'll bring up, I've covered 7 Olympics, this is my 28th Super Bowl. I lose track. I missed the 2020 Super Bowl for COVID, or I would have covered exactly half now. But anyway, Jeremy Warner, who I think most people know was a quarter miler who won the gold medal in the 2004 games, and then won the silver 4 years later. I covered him. He was from hometown, actually the high school where my husband worked, had a great relationship with his family, all of those sorts of things. And so there were 2 of us at the Olympics, and in 2008, and I was trying to look for some different angle because the time constraints and all that with the Olympics are a little bit different. And so I contacted his family, and I said, hey, you think it would be possible if I could sit in the stands with you and watch Jeremy's race? And as it turned out, it was meant to be. Jeremy's dad said, absolutely, we actually have a ticket that's not being used. Come on, you can sit right next to me. So I said, perfect. And so I sat in the stands with them, and he finished second that year, and they all, tears at the end of, some silver medals are good and some silver medals are bad, and for him it was a really bad silver medal because he had run the gold medal 4 years earlier and he had lost to his U.S. rival in this meet. And so he comes around the track to celebrate, and his whole family goes down there, and I walk down with them and trying to be just a fly on the wall. And his mom was just, they were both bawling. He was crying, and all she said was, I love you, to him. And then I went to the press conference and did that, and came out of that and went back with his family and waited with them. And he comes around the corner, and they just start cheering and clapping. And he's not wearing his silver medal. He has it in his pocket. And the first thing his mom says, well, where's the medal? And he pulls it out of his pocket. And so that was the lead to my story. As he rounded the corner, he rounded the corner to cheers, and the cheers were from his family, and he was not wearing the medal. He had to pull it out of his pocket. So that was kind of a different angle to take, and I had it obviously with the credential, but it's trying to find those different ways to tell the same story, especially when you have some time constraints at events like an Olympics or something like that. But you also have to have the relationships with the family. It's not like if I hadn't known Jeremy Warner, I could have just called up his family and goes, hey, by the way, can I come sit with you? You have to have those relationships with people to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that because I think it embodies, the credential in some ways. It's like a status symbol, right? Like you got the credential, and that gets you maybe the table stakes, but it's the work that you put in. And one of the best things would be everything happens at the human level, and it's the effort you put into those relationships, the effort that our students from Arizona came to drive here, like that effort, model that, and that's where you'll really find, because you look at, one of the things I've learned, and I've been with NBC for 18 and a half years, and it's pretty apparent who works and who kind of coasts. And we were talking about equity, like it's not always going to play out in an equal manner. But to answer these questions in terms of the substance of what you want to do, there's no substitute for work and the human relationships that put people. I mean, you went to Tampa a few weeks ago because you knew for that Cowboys game, if you were there, because of the work you'd put in, you were going to end up with something better than if you were doing it from Dallas.
So I would then ask you this, Ms. Williams, when you are looking at the overall scope of opportunities for women in the NFL and just overall leagues, do you feel like you're satisfied, or do you think more can be done?
Well, I always tell the story of what I went through to get here, and there are many stories like this, but my favorite one is I was new in the business. I think it was my second year or third year as a full-time writer. I was working in Bryan College Station. I was covering Texas A&M, and they played Arkansas for this, as old as I am, it was the Southwest Conference, which is not even around. I think A&M's gone through 2 other conferences now to get to the SEC. And it was for the conference title, and I was assigned to do a sidebar on Quinn Grovey, the quarterback at Arkansas. And so I went up to the sports information director and I said, hey, I'm going to your locker room after the game. I'm going to talk to, do a story on Quinn Grovey. And he says, well, we don't allow women in our locker room. And I said, okay, well, what would you like me to do? And he says, well, you need to stand outside, and after the men are done with their interviews, we'll bring, who do you need? I said, well, Quinn Grovey and Coach Hatfield. Ken Hatfield was the coach. And he said, well, I'll bring them out. I said, okay. And of course, now being many more years into this business, that never would have happened. I wouldn't have allowed that to happen, but you at that time as a young reporter, you just go, oh, okay, that sounds great. And so I'm standing outside the locker room. They open it up. The men go into the locker room, and 10 minutes turns into 20, turns into 30, and I'm standing there by myself. And finally, Kirk Bowles from the Austin American-Statesman comes out, and he says, Shireen, what are you doing here? And I explained, and he says, oh, well, there's a back exit. They're gone. Coach Hatfield and Quinn Grovey are gone, long gone. And I don't know if I wanted to throw up or cry. I probably felt like doing both at the time because I felt like I had failed in my assignment. And he said, he put his arm around me. He says, don't worry, I'll give you all the quotes. You know, they were in a group setting. And, you know, one thing led to another. That Awesome got involved in the situation after that. But there were many obstacles like that you go through. In the Bucs locker room, the first year I covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you know, there were players that would walk around without clothes on purpose, or, you know, turn around, you know, those sorts of things. And you go through all those sorts of things. And I'm happy to say that rarely happens much anymore. I'm not going to say it never happens, but rarely does it happen. I've served as president of the Pro Football Writers of America and handled very few of those situations. When I was the president, I did get one phone call from Roger Goodell. One time we had one incident, and he called me, and we talked about it. What should we do about this? How should we handle this? So they are very cognizant of that now, and it's very much improved from what it was. And you know, the Melissa Ludkeys, who actually she was working at Sports Illustrated at the time, had to sue because she was denied access to the World Series locker room. I think it was 1976. So I'm very grateful to her and all of those women who went through even more than I went through. But it's much improved now. Does it need to improve more? Absolutely, it does. But you know, the way it's changed for me over the last 30 years is when I first went in there, you would have players tell you, I don't really want women in the locker room. Famous story, I was working with Jennifer Floyd Engel at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Quincy Carter was the quarterback, and Quincy told Jennifer, he said, I don't believe women should be in the locker room. And she said, well, I don't believe quarterbacks who can't throw a spiral should be NFL quarterbacks. So, you know, there was some of that came, but the way it's changed now is those guys don't want anybody in the locker room. Male, female, whatever. They just don't want anybody in their locker rooms anymore, and they're fighting really hard right now to keep us out of the locker room. But you talk about how to get those stories. That's the way to get the stories, is to be in the locker room. You actually have to be in the locker room now.
So there's so many cultures that are represented here in Phoenix, Arizona. There was even an indigenous woman that designed the ticket art and a lot of signs that you all will see around Phoenix. Why do you think it's important to host big events like the Super Bowl in a place like Phoenix? Not because of, you know, its large population or capacity to fit all these people, but because all the cultures here. Why do you think it's important to hold events in a place that have a lot of culture?
I would say overall, I think from the NFL lens, tapping into that culture that I feel like we haven't had recently. We all saw 2016, 2020 in the NFL, and how long and depressing and dark that period of time was. And now kind of being on the other side of that, we've really tapped into really diving into these cultural markets that have been untapped. I would say, you know, whether that's, you know, your African Americans, your Latinx, your LGBT plus space. I think that's a big piece of, you know, driving fan growth, viewership, and really excitement for the game as a whole. And, you know, coming in and tapping into a place like Arizona where, you know, there is that indigenous culture that we haven't seen in the league before is great, you know, to influence us, but also to excite others around. I feel like the community, I personally love going to the different cities and tapping into the communities where we can kind of look and see what we have to offer here, and this is what we want to do. You mentioned Lucinda. Lucinda is the woman who did a lot of the art that you'll see around here and also the tickets, and sitting down and listening to her story, I think is something that we wanted to kind of break through and kind of push out of here, because we want our audience to understand. We know what the demographic and the makeup of our audience is, and we want to continue to grow that. And if you're not tapping into these cultural markets, different ideologies of individuals, and just learning, you know, communities and cultures as a whole, that's bad on our end, because we remain stagnant and end up in a place where we were a few years ago. And I think in this time, what I've seen from the league is the need to push and want to grow and tap into those other markets.
So my next question would be, you know, everyone in the audience, at some point, they're going to go cover their first Super Bowl. So can you kind of take us back memory lane a little bit? I can pose this to anybody, to your first time at the big game, and just some initial thoughts, or even if you have a story for us.
Well, I'll say the first time I worked a Super Bowl was the 2008 season, so calendar year 2009, and it was the Super Bowl in Tampa, and it was Pittsburgh and Arizona, actually. And I had been with NBC Sports for 5 years at that point, 4.5 years. I'd covered 3 Olympic Games at that point, and the Super Bowl just blew me away. And part of it was you talk about the city and hosting it. Like Tampa is one of the places where, kind of like out here, where it's really spread out. You know, Indy is a place where it's really all compact when it's in Indianapolis, for one example. But the scope of you go to an Olympics and it's 17, 18 days of relentless competition around the clock, and it's constant competition. The Super Bowl is all the build-up to the game on Sunday. And that was kind of thrilling because I had, FOMO. It was like, oh, well, this is happening here, but that's across town. So, but then you get in the stadium, and I think, we wanted to make this point as we're thinking about journalism careers and just careers in the industry. We saw the video from Lester Holt. Like, there's so many people's jobs who went into making that video, and I'm getting to the look and feel. I was on the rental car shuttle from the airport this morning, and you could see the skyscrapers in the distance, and they had the Super Bowl look and feel on it. Like, it put its brand on the city. That is cool. That gives you a little, that instantly, like my blood pressure or whatever, my endorphin, some level of like happiness injected that, like, oh wow, there's the Super Bowl logo, as if compared to if the building was plain. And I say that because in storytelling, it's a 360-degree thing. It all matters. The music was the NBC Nightly News music, the visuals, the logo. So in crafting all these stories and being inclusive, it's not just the words or the pictures, it's all of it and how it comes together. And I think, the Super Bowl, I think, is the pinnacle event of bringing every facet of something together in synergy to lead up to a game for 3 or 3.5 hours that you hope can live up to it. I was listening to the radio this morning on the drive to the airport, though, and someone said, it doesn't even matter, this was actually NASCAR radio, but they go, it doesn't even matter if the game is good, the event is so good. And it's like, well, I kind of like the game to be good too, but the point is, it all really comes together, and I think that impression has only grown as the NFL has gotten more intentional and deliberate, and I think in making the week what it is.
When I was in the 2nd grade, I asked my teacher how far it was to Dallas. I lived in Beaumont near Houston, and she said, well, it's about 5 hours. It's 300 miles. Why do you want to know? And I said, well, I'm going to marry Roger Staubach. He was the quarterback of the Cowboys. And I'm thinking, man, I thought teachers were a lot smarter than this. And so the local newspaper came out and wrote a story on me as the Cowboys' youngest fan. I was 8 years old, and I talked about wanting to marry Roger Staubach, but I also talked about wanting to cover the Cowboys. That was my lifelong goal as an 8-year-old, was to cover the Dallas Cowboys. And I didn't know that women didn't do this. It's something that I wanted to do, and just because something hasn't been done doesn't mean it can't be done. And so that's what I worked toward from the time I was 8 years old. So fast forward to 1994, getting to cover my first Super Bowl, but then the next year, I got to cover the Cowboys in the Super Bowl, and of course that's the last Super Bowl that they've been to since then, but I got to cover them and won and write the game story for the Orlando Sentinel on the Cowboys being in the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl. So that to me was kind of the highlight, but to go from 1994 when it still was a big event, but it was a much smaller event than what it is now. And there probably were more one-on-ones at the media days and things like that. And it's just grown and grown and grown to the point now where we do have 6,000. We're back to pre-COVID levels of media here, 6,000 media, and it's just a much, much bigger deal. But that 1995 Super Bowl was here in Arizona. So that's how far we've come, and it has just continued to grow.
Yeah, my first Super Bowl was a few years ago, which was the worst Super Bowl ever played between the Los Angeles Rams and the New England Patriots. So, it was the event itself, though, is one of those things where, I was fortunate enough that actually, Shireen, before we even worked together, I was covering the Rams practices for the PFWA, and so the Rams let me also cover practice, so that's how we got to know each other. It was awesome getting to be alongside her for those moments, and just watching them practice very unsuccessfully, as it turned out, was one of those things where it's like, man, I actually understand why this is going so poor for them on offense. But once you get into that press box, and the moment for me was seeing the Super Bowl LIII 53 logos on the field. I was like, I can't believe I'm here, man. Like, it was one of the most mind-blowing experiences. And once you get into it, it's a game, and there are things you do during a game, and there are things you do after a game, and like that's what you focus on. But that moment, sitting down in the press box, working with somebody who's become one of my best friends now, and you're looking at that logo and you're like, oh, this is something that 100+ million people are going to watch, and I'm here for this. That was one of the coolest moments of my life, honestly.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think my first Super Bowl was a few years ago, 2020. The Chiefs versus the 49ers. I think what's special is you go through now 18 weeks of games and you're like, oh, this is just another game. Let's just get it over with. But I think, like Miles said, when you get in there and you see the logo, the field, the excitement of what the game does for people, what it has to offer to people, and really, the game is the game, but it's what you have to offer from a storytelling perspective, and what the fans want to see, and what others are looking for. And I think that's been the biggest piece for me as I move into this year's Super Bowl is, yes, the game will be the game, but what else can we offer to make people feel like football is family, football is inclusive, football is more than just football in itself. And that's also been something I think we've been working on with our players. Our players, of course, they love football, but how can we expand that to make sure they're connecting and making people feel like this game cares about them as much as they care about it themselves? And that's the feeling of when I walk into Super Bowl, I'm like, wow, like I'm not playing in this, but I might as well be because I'm getting to experience, everything that goes into it from, creative all the way down to who's in the building. So it's definitely, I would say, something that is very exciting, but, run. It's definitely a long week.
So my last question is going to be from you, Mr. Carl. When it comes to getting that job at NBC Sports, which I know a lot of the students out here would love to work for NBC Sports one day, what are some things that they could do now to kind of position themselves at some point in their career to land at NBC Sports?
Well, I think it's learn as much as you can about what is going to make you passionate and relentless. And you know what? You might not know the answer. For every story like Shireen's, which is awesome, there's some people who don't know exactly what they want to do, but find something that you think you want to do that makes you do. There's something, you've already got part of this, right? If you're in this room right now, so what is it what is that dream? And then, okay, what are some things that can help me get there? But I think I would say find something that you really care about, and I think it's got to have a hook if it's going to be, because getting the job is one thing, but then what are you going to do with it, and what's the purpose? Because I think otherwise things can come and go, and sometimes we'll have conversations with people in the interview process, and it's not really clear what you want to get out of it. And I think if you have, hey, this is why I want to be here right now. It's almost like, what's your mission statement? And I think it's not a mission statement for me if I'm the interviewer. It's the mission statement for you. And I think that's the people who have their own mission statement differentiate themselves, and the rest almost takes care of itself. And I think that that's kind of philosophical, but I've done enough interviews where I think you could really, and I could tell quickly, usually, if the person has their own mission statement that they believe. And like I said, once you have that, I think expand your horizons. Maybe you want to cover the NFL, but maybe an opportunity is going to come up in the NHL. And maybe you have to take it for a reason. And you know that it plays into your mission of getting to the NFL beat. And you just be open to those things and don't exclude something just because it might not be the, quote, perfect fit, if you can think about it and see how it might work. And don't expect someone else to tell you how it can work. Think about it yourself, how it can work, and make your mission statement.
We're going to go ahead and take some audience questions. Any of the students have questions? And start right over here.
I got a quick question. So I recently went to the Super Bowl, like the media, or not the, like the fan experience they have down here. Like you guys said, it's a crazy experience. But one of the reasons why I went there was to try to make a connection with like maybe some of the players who were down there or maybe some of the reporters. But I'm realizing that it's super, super hard just to make any sort of connection in this field. So how did you guys go about making that first connection, whether it be through a player, a reporter, a team? Like, how did you guys go about it? Or what made it easier, I guess you could say?
Mine came through my university. I worked in the sports information office, and that ended up being someone who had professional contacts with NBC Sports. So that was how I did it. It wasn't actually anyone at NBC that I had known. But I think, and I'll gladly hear what the rest of the panel thinks about this, but sometimes, ironically enough, Super Bowl week is almost like maybe not always the best time to make that connection because there is so much going on. So yes, there's 6,000 plus people here, but they're all probably running around crazy. If there are people you think you want to meet, try and find a way either to find their professional contact information and maybe try and reach out to them when it's not quite a busy week for them and maybe when they've got some downtime and be relentless at it. Sometimes it takes, I've sent notes that I've never heard back from of things I was trying to do, and I think being comfortable with that, but I think sometimes use this as the top of the funnel of, okay, who's here? Maybe there's people here and you see who's on a media list or something that like you didn't even know this existed. You might not get them this week, but you might be able to get to someone, in a quieter time if you're talking about NFL.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. This is a long week, but what I would say take away from that, and personally what I did was looking at who was in around the same realm of what I wanted to do and taking note of that, going to the events, saying hi, introducing myself, and then following up maybe a week or two to see if we can just schedule some time to like just get to know each other or talk. And that has been the piece. Connections within the sports realm, at least for me, I feel like has been one of the biggest pieces in really getting to know people. When I started the league, I knew maybe one player, and as I continue to go through the league, you get to meet and introduce yourself to different teams and different players and different people. So I would say like have that idea of, I want to talk to so-and-so from so-and-so here, but it may not happen this week, but I want to follow up and say, hey, I went to your panel last week, and I loved when you said this, and that. Would love to connect and talk or dive deeper into that because this is what my goals and my passions are. And more than likely, most people won't say like, no, don't email me again. They'll make that time. But this, I think to agree with Ryan said, this is one of those weeks where I think people are so ingrained in, making sure everything is going well, or they have that story or they have that content piece that they're not focused on the other outside aspects of it.
Come on. I was going to say, y'all got to have questions.
Janae right in the front.
Thank you all again for being up here. And throughout your careers, you've all hit like pinnacles and dreams that only we could dream about: Super Bowls, Emmys, Hall of Fame. How did you handle that point of success? Like, was it a little overwhelming? Like, whoa, like, okay, I am now at this big caliber. Like, how do you just deal with always being at a big stage where there's lots of pressure and all the things like that?
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, I grew up a huge Cowboys fan. I'm not a Cowboys fan now, and this business kind of beats that out of you. And it'll be interesting when I retire, if I go back to being a Cowboys fan, or if I'm just a fan of the NFL and just like watching games. My husband's a Dolphins fan. Maybe I'll become a Dolphins fan. I don't know. But it's really strange how that has changed. I'm a passionate A&M fan, and I'm a passionate Astros fan, and I live and die when those teams win or lose. But the NFL, I really don't care. Like it's, you know, you go and you just want to see, like Sunday, I just want to see a good game. I truly don't care who wins. So I think that part of it probably has changed some for me. I don't even know if I answered the right question.
I don't know. It's interesting because it's like, I'll say something lame and just go with what Tom Brady says. And when people, and he guess he can't say this anymore, but when people ask him, you know, what's your favorite Super Bowl, he always used to say the next one. And so for me, and I think it probably has something to do with where I am in my career, probably has a lot to do with it, but it's like, okay, you get to one thing, and it's like, yeah, that's good, and we can celebrate this for 24 hours, as people in the NFL like to say, but then it's, what's the next one? And so I like to think that I'm still working toward whatever that next thing is. I don't necessarily need to even know what that is, but I'm not just going to say, oh, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe I'm covering the Super Bowl. This is everything that I've ever, like, yeah, it's great, but at a certain point, it's like, what's the next one? So
I think I would add quickly, too, sometimes it's not defined based on like a feeling of accomplishment or pride or gratitude isn't even defined by the nature of the event. It might be because of whatever the story is accomplishing. And Shireen was talking about the Olympics earlier, and I've done every Olympics since 2004, and I've met and interviewed and helped tell the story of people the likes of Michael Phelps, but also many, many more people whose names I can't even remember right now, or you might not know. And for them to be able to have their story told with empathy and with, their dignity being front and center, those are some of the things that I think, if my career ended today, I think those are the things I'd be proudest of, not necessarily bound by the nature of the event. That's just kind of my personal kind of experience, but I think it really is, when you've done a job well done and you've poured your heart into something. And I think that can be at a Super Bowl, great. I mean, that's nirvana if it all lines up that way. But sometimes it's those everyday things that really, I think, can be really rewarding too and sustaining.
I have a question. Everything you guys have said has been very inspirational and very positive. But one thing I think as humans that we have to learn is not only resiliency, but failure. You might have an editor that doesn't like you. You might have someone who puts a target on your back for a comment you make. You might see different conversations or be seen in a different light as a journalist. And you have to find the resiliency to, okay, pick yourself back up, dust off your knees. All right, let's find a different beat. Let's find a different newscast. Let's find a different opportunity. Briefly, can you each give me a situation where you failed and had to redirect and how it helped your growth?
I'll start, sure. I was a horrible fit for the Panthers, and it for whatever reason, it didn't work. I thought the job was going to be great. I thought it was going to be something like it would have been, it was with the Rams, but the organization wasn't a right fit for whatever reason, fine. But I think it's not necessarily about just continuing to dust yourself off or whatever. It's, what did I learn from this? Like, why, like going back into the process, why did this bad outcome come from what I thought was a good process? All right, when I'm talking to people, did I ask the right questions? Did I, factor in every single thing that I thought I needed to? And frankly, the answers happen to be no. So for me, it was about, I don't necessarily want to put it like this, but I guess it kind of was, crafting an exit strategy where you're like, all right, well, if this isn't working, where can I go and what can I do that will? You know, whether, for me, that was, at that point, I was thinking like, man, I should go back to school. I can get a graduate degree, or I can do something else, or, you know, is somebody else hiring? And, you know, what can I do to make sure that I'm not just sitting here in what is a failure and wallowing in it, instead of saying, all right, look, this ain't working. What can we do to get ourselves in a situation that does? And fortunately, this job came along. So thanks, Ron. And Shireen for recommending me. Yeah.
I think I can name hundreds, but one thing that kind of stands out to me, I was an early in my career as an Olympics researcher, and the Olympics researcher job, you will go to wherever an event is taking place, and you will try to interview as many athletes who you project to be prominent players in the next Olympics 2-3 years from now. So, and so it could be a lot of travel, but it's the travel is aligned with the winter or summer sports seasons. So probably I'm in Liberec, Czech Republic. It is the Nordic World Championships. And there is probably a press bullpen of about, I mean, not Super Bowl size, but pretty darn big. And it was probably about 1,200 journalists. And I was one of 3 that I could identify as being from North America. This was a huge European event. And so long story short, my job, NBC is paying for me. They have paid for me to get in a plane and a rental car and a hotel for a week to talk to as many athletes as possible. And I'm now 3 days into this event, and I've talked to 0 athletes because they don't want to talk. You know, like it's like we're going to their Super Bowl to try and talk to them about the Olympics. Like, that's a hurdle in and of itself. We've evolved that approach, by the way. That's one of the learnings from this failure. But I will say, but one of the things is, okay, how do you salvage it? Thankfully, my boss at the time was very encouraging, because I was transparent with him. I said, Joe, I've been here for 3 days. I haven't talked with anyone. And he could tell I was really down. And he said, it's okay. You know, you got time. The Olympics are not tomorrow. And not every boss would have been that way. He said, you're doing a lot of travel. You've been on the road for a month. You know, explore. Like, it was very understanding. And then, okay, that allowed me, for me, the clarity to think. Because previously, like, the panic was precluding me from thinking. Because obviously the approach wasn't working. Whatever I was doing was not working. But I couldn't think. So I ended up, with that encouragement and that breathing room, I sat down with the press officer from the Ski Federation, and I said, hey, you know, what do you think the best way is? And over the next few days, I probably only talked to 2 or 3 athletes total. But he gave me key contacts with each country's federation of who the right people to talk to were there to reach out to, and then have conversations that sustained over the coming months. And then you go to the following time we had a World Championships, and that press officer, maybe because he still felt sorry for me, I don't know, but he invited me to dinner, and we talked about the load. So I ended up knowing more about Nordic skiing than anybody could have possibly wanted to know before the Vancouver Olympics. So that was a bit long-winded, but I think it's multifaceted, and it's a great question. Seek whatever is going to be a source of encouragement, because that's going to help give you the space to pick up and go forward.
Well, there's tons of mistakes, getting names wrong and in print, and having athletes mad at you, and all those sorts of things that you go through. And nobody's perfect. It happens, and especially in the internet day and age. But fortunately nowadays we can quickly correct those, as opposed to the newspaper when it was there permanently in press. But, you know, my biggest failure, which was no fault of my own, came in 2017. And I was working had spent my whole career working for newspapers. And as we all know, newspapers are in trouble, have been in trouble for a really, really long time. And so I was at the top of the pay scale at the newspaper because people kept offering me jobs, and this Fort Worth Star-Telegram kept matching or getting close to, so I stayed, and I'm a very comfortable person, and I would still be there today if what happened hadn't happened. And I got laid off in 2017, and they had a guy come in with a hatchet who had a certain amount of money that he had to make, and cutting my salary was an easy way to start getting there. Didn't know me, had no idea what I did. Worst professional day of my life was getting that phone call to come in and bring your playbook, as it were. It turned out to be the best day of my life, career-wise, because I ended up falling into NBC right away, never missed a day of work, and again, I wouldn't have left on my own, and it's been the greatest part of my career has been over these last 5 years. So the worst day turned out to be the best day, and I would say sometimes you just don't see beyond the immediate to know that that things probably are going to work out and could work out for the better.
Yeah, I would say, I guess how my mindset when it comes to mistakes, we're definitely going to make them. For me, what I tell myself as well as my team is we're not surgeons, we're not doctors. If we make a mistake, nobody is going to die here. It is a game. The game is going to happen no matter what. And I would say, like, in terms of messing up, I had this, in my head, I thought it was this amazing content idea, like, oh my God, the players are gonna love it, they're gonna go. And I remember flying to Dallas to meet with a player, you know, to talk about it, and he ripped me a new one. I was so hurt, and I remember just being like, I just hate this. Like, I'll never support the Cowboys. Like, I hate it. And then I just thought about it and saying of like, in that moment, I was uncomfortable because I had never had anybody, you know, talk to me in that moment. And I think what I learned from that is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. In that moment, what did I take away from it? In that I was so uncomfortable that I could say, you know what, next time, this is how I would like to move forward. And that's how I look at it. We're going to make those mistakes continuously. Never sit in it, never soak in it, and really learning to talk to your inner saboteur, as I would like to say, because I feel like a lot of the time it's us in our heads, you know, overthinking a lot of these things when it's like, okay, it happened, and I think we've all hit on it of what can I take away from this? What did I learn? And let's move forward. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but.
Oh yeah, for myself, NBCU Academy, and just Cronkite, we are just super thrilled that we got this time to have this sit-down conversation with you. You could be anywhere during the Super Bowl week, but you're here in Cronkite, so thank you all so much.
Thank you all again for coming. Let's give our panel a huge hand. And while you guys are standing posing for pictures, I did want to mention that we do have some signature events at NBCU Academy we want to bring to your attention. First is our Senior Night Live on March 1st. That's a chance for all rising seniors to join us virtually for a powerful conversation about next steps. And then our embed application process will open this spring, so that's for recent grads. You saw the sizzle earlier. And if you've seen our QR code floating around for our next level summit, it is on March 22nd, so make sure you register. So again, thank you to the Cronkite School. This has been an amazing event. To our wonderful panel, let's give them a huge hand. Thank you for your raw insight and your wealth of information. To the University of Arizona, thank you for making the trek from Tucson. To our student production team, aren't you guys impressed with these kids? I'm sorry, young adults. Sorry, young adults. Great job. So thank you again. Refreshments, swag at our table as you exit, and safe travels to our group from Tucson.